In this lecture, I'm going to introduce you to the language of variables. First things first, what's a variable? A variable is any observation that can take different values. Take a variable age. Age can take many different values. You can be young, you can be middle-aged, you could be a senior citizen, or you can be 0 to 10 years, you can be 11 to 20, 21 to 30. So variables are basically an observation that takes different values. We distinguish between the variable and its attribute. So the attribute is the specific value. So a specific age, middle age, would be a value on the variable age. Here's another example. Variable sex or gender takes on the attributes male and female. Or agreement, how strongly you agree or disagree. And it takes on the values strongly agree, disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. And so those are the 5 attributes of the variable agreement. There are certain properties of these attributes that you must keep in mind. First, the attributes of variables should be exhaustive. And what that means is it should exhaust the entire list of possibilities of values for that particular variable. And it should be mutually exclusive. And what that means is that if you fall within one specific category, you cannot fit within the other. Here's an example of a variable occupation. Notice the attributes: white-collared, blue-collared, service, retired, unemployed, self-employed, and other. The reason we put other there is so that this becomes exhaustive. In other words, if you don't fit into any of the above, you can always choose other. Also notice that if you are in any one category, in theory, you cannot be in another, right? So if you're a student, you cannot be self-employed. Now, you may say, well, you have some people who do multiple jobs. Now, what do you do when you do that? Well, you ask them to take or pick one that best describes them. All right? So that's an important thing to understand. Variables have attributes. The attributes of variables should be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Another way in which we describe variables is based on types of variables, right? And there are 2 types of variables. One is what is called as an independent variable, which is a variable that leads to or causes something else, and a dependent variable, one that is caused or affected by the other variable, right? That's influenced by the other variable. So an independent variable is something that is manipulated either by you or by nature itself. So here's an example of a dependent variable: academic achievement, or how well you do in school, your GPA. And we say, well, individual's GPA could be influenced by a ton of independent variables or a ton of causes. And we're going to look at some of these causes. So it could be family structure, right? The type of family structure or unit that they have. It could be economic status, how wealthy the family is. It could be schooling, the type of school, high school or college or university you go to. It could be the kind of classes or tutoring that the individual or the student gets. Now, out of this, family structure and economic status is something that you can't manipulate, right? You're born into that. But public policy can influence the types of schools people get. So you can give them school vouchers, for instance. So you can have people get access to better schools. You can give them special tutoring so they can get to go or get more tutoring, right? So in this way, we have variables that can be manipulated, variables that cannot be manipulated. The way in which we think of variables is based on how they're related. So 2 variables can be positively related. Positive relationship is positive synchronicity. What that means is when one variable goes up, the other also goes up. When one variable goes down, the other also goes down. Take an example of years of education. Years of education influences income. The longer the time you spend at school, the more the income. Likewise, from the field of communication, an example we can use is uncertainty and information seeking. The more uncertainty you have, the more information you seek. These are positive relationships. You can also have a negative relationship or negative synchronicity. Negative correspondence is where when one variable goes up in value, the other reduces in value commensurately. Here's an example of years of education and poverty. The more education you get, the less is your poverty. That's a negative relationship. Likewise, we can go back to our example of uncertainty, and we can look at stress, which is the physical manifestation of uncertainty. Higher the stress, lower the productivity in the organization, or higher your individual stress, lower is your overall productivity, and that's a negative relationship. Another very important class of relationships that we as human beings need to remember is the lack of a relationship. And very often, and I say this, as human beings, we tend to conflate relationships, find relationships that are positive or negative, which do not exist. And there's always a danger that we do that in the sciences. Very often, so let me give you an example. Almost all of you, I'm sure, all of us, know about our star signs, our zodiac signs, right? We try to relate, and for the people who are really into this, they try to relate the alignments of the planets, the day they were born, the time of their birth, the location of their birth, with some kind of destiny or life history or life course. That's an example of two completely unrelated variables being related. Some science does that too. For instance, very early on, people in many cultures to this day, and some scientists early on, connected catching a cold, which is to being cold or getting wet, for instance. So they would say, well, if you get wet, you catch a cold. That's again relating to unrelated events. Likewise, early scientists conflated people's skin color or how they looked with their destiny or their success in life. Again, lack of relationship being seen as having a relationship, right? And another type of relationship that we talk about is a curvilinear relationship. A curvilinear relationship is one, and there could be two types of it, but here's an example of one where in the beginning the relationship is positive, but the more and more and more you do of something, that relationship over time starts decaying and becoming negative. It could be the other way around. In the beginning, the relationship is negative. The more and more and more you do something, the relationship gets positive. So here's an example of the former, right? Severity of illness and dosage. If you give yourself medication because you're very sick, in the beginning, you're going to see good returns. You're going to start feeling better. But if you keep upping your dosage, what's going to happen over time is that relationship is going to get worse. Rather than feeling better, you're going to start getting sicker or iller because of the medication itself. That's an example of a curvilinear relationship that begins positively. You can have a curvilinear relationship that begins slowly, gradually, and cascades upwards. The reverse of this, almost like an S-shaped or a T-shaped curve, right? And that would be how products diffuse in the marketplace. In the beginning, you have a few people, then you have a few more people, then it starts cascading, and that's how the product starts diffusing faster and faster, and then at a certain point it plateaus, flattens out, and then it just becomes a flat curve on the top. So that's a curvilinear relationship, or also called a decaying exponential, right? So we have different types of relationships. We also, based on this, can look at different types of research studies, right? There are three broad types of research studies that we need to think of based on the types of relationships between variables that we study. One is what is called as a descriptive relationship, right? A descriptive relationship is when we study the opinion of a group of people. So let's say, we have the presidential primaries going on, and what we're trying to see is what is the opinion of a group of people, what do people think about Hillary Clinton. That's a descriptive study. Second types of studies are what I call as relational studies. In relational studies, we try to relate their opinion to some characteristic. So we could say, what do males or females think about Hillary Clinton? Or what do Democrats or registered Republicans think about Hillary Clinton? The last form is what I call as causal relationship. In causal relationship, we try to study what causes, what factors affect these opinions. In other words, what is it about people that make them perhaps Democrats? What is it about people that make them Republicans, which in turn influences their opinions of candidates? So for instance, we might want to say, what is the family structure? What is the economic conditions within which they were raised? Which city were they raised in? What kind of family or what kind of schooling did they get? What kind of schooling did their parents get, for instance? Those are causal studies, which are trying to explain the basis for people's opinions or for people's political affiliation, which ultimately influences their opinions about a particular candidate. So that's a causal study. All right. Now, another important thing that's something that you need to consider and remember is time, right? Time. And how do we look at time in research studies? One, we have what is called as a cross-sectional way of looking at time, right? A cross-sectional study is a study that takes place at one point in time. And it's important to understand what I mean by this. What I mean by this is that the study is done at one point in time. It doesn't mean the study is done only today. It is done such that the individual respondent who is providing us with the data is providing us with the response at one point in time or just once. So let me give you an example. If I do a survey in our COM 205 class over one whole semester, I give you an entire semester to participate in the survey, but all of you can answer the survey just once by the end of the semester. That is a cross-section study, right? Because each individual respondent got one opportunity and only one to provide a response to a survey. The second type of studies are what are called as longitudinal studies. And what longitudinal studies do is they allow the respondent or they ask the respondent for responses in more than one occasion. So it's a minimum of two. Cross-sectional studies are minimum of one, longitudinal minimum of two. A longitudinal study could be a repeated measures. In repeated measures, the same person gives responses in a minimum of two and a maximum of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times. We also have what is called as a time series study. A time series study is where an individual is asked to provide a response many times, many collection episodes. So time series is usually 50, 100 repeated iterations of data coming from the same individual. So for instance, if I check your heart rate or your pulse rate over a period of time, that would be a time series data. Or if you look at the stock market index or for a given day, that would be a time series data. All right, so that's different ways in which we look at the relationship between variables, and it's critical to understand what together we call the language of variables.